Now, one thing I hadn't done yet on this channel was give any sort of formal review of The Force Awakens. I've said before that I think the movie is more or less good for what it is, a reintroduction to Star Wars for those who needed it, but that it wasn't one I personally needed because, well, I hadn't gone anywhere, and that I'd much rather have had a brand new story instead of basically remaking A New Hope. That said, though, the mystery element of the film was indeed enough to get me invested in this story and the new characters. I thought it laid the groundwork for a potentially great trilogy, and I was eager to see what came next. But anyway, I'm not here to talk about what we actually got next and how well it did or didn't answer those questions. Instead, I'm just here to talk about The Force Awakens, and the game plan for this video is to, in a sense, do a rather candid commentary track of the film. Though obviously I can't just talk over the movie as it plays and post it on YouTube, or it'll be flagged for copyright violations. So what I'm going to do instead is just watch the movie and pause it at certain points, take a screenshot, and then give my thoughts on whatever pops into my head at that moment. And the hope here is that you know the movie well enough that just seeing a screenshot will remind you of what's going on in the scene, since at most I'll only give a very brief reminder of what's happening. And honestly here, I don't know how coherent or interesting this will all turn out to be, so this could very well be the first and last time I do something like this. But if you all enjoy it, I'd certainly be open to doing more of it in the future. I also have no idea how long this will be, so there's a very, very good chance this will turn into part 1 of who knows how many. And finally here, if you're someone who doesn't like when movies get nitpicked or overanalyzed, this probably isn't going to be the series for you, since part of the point here is to get into the nitty-gritty details of this movie. And with all of that said, without further ado, let's watch some Star Wars. Okay, so as you can see, I didn't make it very far into the film before I had a pause, because the first line of the opening crawl is oh so curious, as is the whole first section here. Because what you have to keep in mind as you read the words Luke Skywalker has vanished, and then a little bit later you read that he's the last Jedi, is the very last thing we've seen in the story at the end of episode 6 is that Luke Skywalker had been triumphant, and we were left to assume he was going to heed Yoda's last request and pass on what he had learned. And Yoda also had said at that time, right before he died, the last of the Jedi will you be? So what this opening crawl is telling me here is that Luke hasn't accomplished a whole lot in the past 30 years if he's still the last Jedi, and he's apparently also run away too. Though at this point, and for most of the video, I'll be operating under the assumption we don't know how the next part of this story is going to play out, meaning we don't know what the last Jedi is going to be. Anyway, at this point, I'd imagine pretty much everyone reading this is making the assumption that Luke Skywalker has vanished for a very, very good reason, that he's probably on some sort of secret mission, especially since we'll soon learn that there's a map to him, implying he wants to be found at some point. Also here, I feel like it should say Episode 10, The Force Awakens, because as the movie goes on, it feels more and more like we've missed a lot of very important parts of the story, because many of these characters, and the galaxy itself, are not in the place or places we'd expect to find them, or were led to believe they'd be considering the way the last movie had ended. For example, sure there's a 19-year gap between episodes 3 and 4, but all of our main characters from 3 and the galaxy itself are exactly where we'd expect them to be, or were led to believe they would be when 4 starts. We really don't feel like we're missing anything all that important. Yoda and Obi-Wan are still in exile, with the latter still on Tatooine watching over Luke. Vader and Sidious are still doing their thing and ruling the galaxy, and it seems like things have only gotten worse, which we'd assume it would have been. Again, it doesn't feel like we've missed some large important chunk of the story when episode 4 starts, not like it does when episode 7 starts. Which is why, as I've argued before, it would have made a lot more sense had this trilogy started out with the galaxy and our characters in a good place, and then everything just started to fall apart. Okay, so here we have the opening line of the film spoken by Lor San Tekka, and you may not have known his name because, well, we never learned anything about him or why he has this part of the map to Luke, or why he seems to be such good friends with Leia, or really anything about the guy. Anyway, he gets the first line of the new trilogy, which is, "This will begin to make things right." And there are a lot of people who think this is almost like a fourth wall break, that we're literally being told by the film that this movie, or the Disney era of Star Wars, will begin to fix things after the prequels made a mess of Star Wars. From their point of view, of course, not mine, because I think the prequels, though maybe not perfect films, expanded far, far more on the lore and did a better job of world building than the first 2 movies of the sequel trilogy have. Anyway, the main reason I consider buying into this maybe being some sort of fourth wall break or secret message to the fans is how often J.J. Abrams and everyone else associated with the movie talked about how they were going back to practical effects after the prequels relied heavily on green screens and digital effects. as if that was the one and only reason that there was any sort of failure around those movies, or the main reason why some fans didn't like the prequels. When, to be fair here, there were a lot of different reasons why some people just didn't like the prequels, and a lot of reasons why people enjoyed the original trilogy well beyond just the incredible practical effects it gave us. So this part here gets an eye roll out of me, and this is where I'm going to start getting nitpicky. So again, if you don't like that sort of thing, that's fine and all, but just don't run to the comments and tell me I'm being nitpicky when I've warned you that's part of the point of this video. Anyway, here we have one stormtrooper who orders just two others, not a significant part of their force, to go stop the X-Wing. And though they do disable the ship, after they're taken out or shot down by Poe here, no other stormtroopers bother to go check on this X-Wing, even though I'm sure they know the mission objective, to recover something for Kylo Ren. So here they're all just letting an X-Wing sit there that they don't know for sure is disabled, which could, in theory, just easily get away with whatever they're looking for, while they waste time burning the village down, even though what they're looking for could also be in one of these huts that they're torching, and hence melting what they're looking for. So this is what happens when you put flashy visuals ahead of story and include flame troopers, probably just to sell some toys. And so here we have Poe giving the map to BB-8 and sending him out into the desert, which it feels familiar somehow, like I've seen something like this before. Anyway, this is a fine plan, I guess. You can't escape the planet because your X-Wing is disabled, so you give it to the droid and hope that somehow, someway, he can get it back to the Resistance. Likely if Poe doesn't report back in short order, the Resistance will assume the worst and send someone after him, and hopefully they'll contact BB-8 and all will be good. But what doesn't make so much sense is Poe not running into the desert in a different direction from BB-8, and instead all but letting himself get captured where he's going to get interrogated. And sure, maybe Poe doesn't realize that Kylo Ren could just rip the information from his mind, but still, you'd think going on the run and drawing them away from BB-8 and maybe escaping himself was a better plan here, though maybe Poe didn't like his odds of being lost in the desert. But let's keep it real instead. The reason Poe doesn't run here is because he needs to get captured and taken aboard the Star Destroyer where he'll meet Finn and escape with him. Though originally in that escape, or should I say the crash, Poe was going to die. It was actually Oscar Isaac, the actor who plays him of course, who convinced J.J. Abrams to let him live, and now his character has essentially become one of the big three of this trilogy. Okay, now this moment I kind of like. The moment where it begins to dawn on Finn who or what he is or what the First Order is after seeing his friend, or what I'd guess is his friend, shot by Poe. Though I'm not sure if Finn realizes, or would after the fact, that it was Poe who killed his friend. There could have been an interesting story dynamic there that never gets explored because, while these two spent almost no time together in the next movie, which was an odd decision to make considering the on-screen chemistry they had in this one, but again, we're not talking about that film right now. Anyway, I actually think the character of Finn was, or could have been, a really bold move to make in a saga film. Because one thing the main saga movies, or Skywalker trilogies, whatever you really want to call them, one thing they've never done is explored the idea that underneath those white helmets, whether they be clones or stormtroopers, that there could be real people under there. Sure, in Episode 3 we briefly are introduced to Commander Cody, and it's implied he has a genuine friendship with Obi-Wan, but that's a far cry from actually exploring the character, or that these clones were quote-unquote real people under there. And sure, the Clone Wars animated series does explore that topic heavily, and it's one of the many reasons why that show is fantastic. But in the main movies, we're never supposed to think about, are these bad guys really all bad guys? When Luke blows up the Death Star in the first Star Wars film, he's killing hundreds of thousands of people. And who knows how many Finns were on that thing when it blew? How many were there not because they wanted to be or because they were bad guys, because that's just where their lives had taken them. Finn was our first chance to really explore some of these tougher questions in the actual saga films, though honestly, I'm not sure if that's the time and place for them, and I like the fact that shows like the Clone Wars again, or movies like Rogue One, do go in and explore these sorts of things. Either way, at no point in The Force Awakens do we really even touch on these tougher questions per se. Finn, unfortunately, is just comic relief in this film, when in all reality, he had the potential to be probably the best character in the entire film. Okay, so the whole point of this scene where Kylo Ren kills Lor San Tekka is to start to show us just how evil he is, because clearly, considering the first thing Kylo Ren says to him is, "Look how old you've become," it implies they've known each other for a very long time, and they were once friends. This is further reinforced by the opening scene of the movie, where it's implied Lor San Tekka also knows Leia quite well, even though at this point we don't know Kylo is Leia's son. Anyway, in other words, we're supposed to believe that Kylo Ren doesn't hesitate to kill a longtime family friend, which again makes him evil. And in many ways, this scene mirrors the introduction of Darth Vader in A New Hope when he kills Captain Antilles. And yes, you could certainly make the argument that killing Lor San Tekka here is about the dumbest thing Kylo Ren could do, considering the old man almost undoubtedly knows where the map is, and if you're Kylo Ren, well, you have the power to rip that information from his mind. However, and not to make excuses for the film here, but it could be that Lor San Tekka, again, having known Kylo Ren for so long and knowing about his temper, knew what buttons to push so that Kylo Ren would kill him instead of torturing him for the information. This is then why Lor San Tekka keeps talking about Kylo's family and where he came from. However, here it's much harder to explain why Kylo Ren doesn't immediately rip the information from Poe's mind and instead has him taken back to the ship, where he also doesn't immediately rip the information from his mind once there. Again, this is all done because the story needs to get Poe and Finn together so that they can escape. We then get yet another scene that, at face value, doesn't make a ton of sense, but is meant to establish a few things early in the film. Here, Kylo Ren orders the villagers to be killed, even though one of them, or some of them, may know something about the map he's looking for. But what this moment is supposed to do is again show us just how evil Kylo Ren is, and how evil the First Order is, and that Finn, the stormtrooper with the bloody handprint on his helmet, stands apart from them now, and will not help carry out this senseless slaughter. But conveying all this comes at the expense of Kylo Ren once again making a decision that makes no sense, or just not being very intelligent. Okay, now this is a scene I've had many fun debates with people over. Some believe that Kylo Ren pauses and looks at Finn because he senses that the Force has just awoken in him, and that Rey will not be the only future Jedi that we get in this trilogy. Others, like me, believe that Kylo is only sensing the indecision out of him, the conflict. That all his troopers are bred since birth to just follow orders without question, and here is one questioning everything, and Kylo can sense that. And to me that just makes more sense, because if he was Force sensitive, I'd imagine Kylo would have personally done something about it. Whether that be kill him on the spot or test his abilities later to see his potential, I don't know. But he'd do something about it. Instead, it seems as if he tells Phasma to look into the matter, hence when they get back to the ship, Phasma confronts Finn and demands to inspect his blaster. She then sends him to reconditioning because she's realized something has gone wrong with his brainwashing, not that he's Force sensitive. And now we come to the introduction of Rey, and honestly here, I think it's fantastic, a great example of visual storytelling. We start out by seeing her crawl around the innards of a massive, downed and derelict Star Destroyer, which is a great way to convey her loneliness and isolation, but also her self-reliance, and that she's someone who can take care of herself. And what I immediately thought Rey's biggest flaw or obstacle to overcome in this trilogy would be, is that she'd have a very, very hard time trusting others, or putting her faith in something other than herself or the tangible. You know, like having trouble putting her faith in the Force. That she's used to believing in and only relying on what she can feel and touch, what exists right in front of her, and what she needs to survive just this moment on such a harsh planet like Jakku. That unlike Luke, who always looked to the future, she couldn't see beyond just the moment. That believing in mystical energy fields is something for those who want to die of thirst or starvation in the desert. But to jump way ahead for just a moment, I fully believe Rey closing her eyes and letting the Force in at the end of the film was a mistake for both the character and overall story. Again, learning to find faith in all of this Force mumbo-jumbo should have been the hardest test for a character like Rey in the trilogy. Okay, this here is another great moment, when Rey sees the old woman doing the same thing she's currently doing, that is, cleaning up scrap to be sold. And Rey's basically looking at what she'll become 50 or 60 years from now, unless something changes in her life, which is never going to happen, if she continues to believe this lie she tells herself about her family coming back for her. And do note that Rey always says family. She never once mentions her parents in the movie. It was we fans who made the assumption that that was who she was waiting for. Anyway, it was moments like these that led me to believe that Rey's parents or family could end up potentially being nobody special, that they, meaning Disney and Lucasfilm, who obviously have a vested interest in what this character ultimately becomes or represents, were going to play on this idea that it didn't matter who she was or where she'd come from, that it only mattered where she was going and who she became. That's a very Disney message after all. And so again, I got from this movie, at least the first half of it, that believing in herself wasn't going to be the problem for Rey, that it was trusting others and doing for others or giving to them or thinking of them, that's where she would struggle. And do keep in mind that the Jedi way is the path of selflessness, of always thinking of others and never of yourself, which is why I really liked the Rey we were first introduced to here in The Force Awakens. I thought the path to becoming a Jedi would be a long, difficult road for a character like this. This here is yet another cool shot, in my opinion. Again, it's highlighting Rey's isolation and loneliness, as does the fact that Rey's now been on screen for 4 straight minutes and hasn't said a single word to anyone. We've just watched her daily routine, and it doesn't involve her even having to speak to anyone, and barely involved her even interacting with anyone. Again, this was some great visual storytelling, and it told us everything we needed to know about Rey without the character even uttering one single word. And then Rey finally does speak. And no, I'm not about to make some stupid joke that's when it all starts to go wrong for the character. Because this was yet another good scene too. It shows Rey jump to the defense of BB-8, that she does have compassion within her. Yet as soon as BB-8 is free, she immediately is directing him out of her life again. And she initially balks at this idea of letting him stay with her. It was one thing to help out the droid, it's a whole other to be somehow responsible for him after the fact. And within all this happening, there's another moment I've debated people over, and it's when BB-8 says something to the effect that his identity is classified and it's a big secret, and Rey responds, "Me too." Now, some people took this to mean that Rey was acknowledging that she knows who she is and it's someone important, when I clearly think this was meant to be sarcastic. I mean, imagine you're Rey and you just found this droid in the middle of the desert on Jakku, and it's telling you its identity and purpose is classified and it's a big secret. Your response is likely going to be, "Yeah, sure, buddy, mine too." And just a quick extra note about BB-8 here, I have to admit that the work they did on him was incredible. Somehow what amounts to a ball with a saucer on top of it managed to be a character and one that could even express emotions. So whoever was responsible for designing him, creating him, operating him, and so on, and do keep in mind he was real, not CGI, anyway, they get a round of applause because that was a hell of a job. Then we get to this scene, where Kylo Ren finally decides to use his powers to get the information out of Poe's mind, after letting all kinds of time go by, and for some reason, letting others try first. When it seems like it took only a matter of minutes or even seconds to get what he needed, and it should have been done on the planet when BB-8 was not all that far away. I mean, is this a cool scene? Is it cool to see Kylo use this ability? Sure, of course it is. Should it have been done on the planet? Yeah. Problem is that would have ended the movie or story right then and there. It would have been like those 2 Imperials in A New Hope firing upon the escape pod R2 and C-3PO were in, despite it not having life signs. Okay, this is yet another really good scene, I think. I love that Rey doesn't initially hesitate when she gets offered 60 portions of food for BB-8, because that's likely enough to last her quite some time. And again, on Jakku, you have to fend for yourself and worry about how you're going to survive. This shows us that instinctively, she's of course only going to look out for herself. That this is what living alone on Jakku has made her, someone who automatically puts herself first without thought of anyone else. And after reflecting on it, she then realizes it's not her place to sell the droid, or that she just can't do it for whatever reason. Again, hinting at the compassion within her. Still, I think this is a better scene if, even after giving it some thought, she still decides to sell the droid, and maybe BB-8 makes a break for it, escapes, and meets up with Rey again later. Okay, next up here is one of my favorite moments in the whole movie, actually, because I really buy into this fast friendship formed between these two characters, and as I said earlier in this video, it's a shame that we don't see these two on screen together more, especially in the next movie when they're hardly together at all. But before I start into this whole sequence of Poe and Finn's escape, of which there are some issues and a lot to talk about, I think I'm going to call the video for now, and let you all weigh in on whether or not you're enjoying this, and if I should keep going or not. So far, I'm about 20 minutes into the movie, and looks like this video is going to be about 20 minutes long, so this is likely going to be a rather long series altogether, so let me know your thoughts and whether or not it should continue. Well, that's all I've got for this time, and if you made it this far, well, thank you for one, and for two, I'm guessing that means you've enjoyed the format, and if that's the case, then please let me know in the comments below. Also, feel free to give me your thoughts on what I've had to say here. Do you agree that Rey's introduction was great and that Kylo's was a bit head-scratching? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.